Hey guys, tonight we are going to slip quietly into a little country of steep mountains, deep fjords, and sleepy coastal towns, and then watch the sky slowly darken as something alarming moves in from far away. You settle under your blanket while your mind sails up a Norwegian fjord in the late 1930 seconds, the air sharp with salt and cold, the village below you lit by a scatter of yellow windows. Life feels small, predictable, and safe. People worry more about fish prices and getting the hay in before the rain than about anything happening in Berlin. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want to make this feel like a tiny global campfire, drop a comment with where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand on a wooden pier in a small Norwegian harbour town as evening arrives, the boards damp beneath your boots, the water below almost black. Behind you, the village clings to the slope in layers of white and red houses, each with its own glowing window. Somewhere, a radio crackles with a dance tune from Oslo, and somebody laughs outside the cafe. The biggest drama in town today is that the baker ran out of sweet buns before noon. To be fair, that would still be a tragedy if it happened now. War or no war, the world beyond the mountains feels far away. Norway is neutral, officially, like it was in the First World War. People repeat that word as if it is a magic spell. Neutral, safe, untouched. Oslo newspapers carry stories about Hitler and invasions in Europe, but here the headlines sit beside fishing reports and advertisements for winter boots. One mainstream fact quietly shapes this calm. Norway is a relatively young independent state, separated from Sweden in 1905, still figuring out its politics and its place in Europe. You can hear that in dockside conversations, where older fishermen complain that politicians in Oslo talk too much and never mend a net, then turn back to gossip about the price of herring. Daily life feels rugged but steady. You rise early, even in winter darkness, to tend animals or head out to sea. Women scrub wooden floors and knit thick wool sweaters, whose patterns your grandmother swears protect you from both cold and bad luck. Children walk to school in long wool socks and heavy coats, learning geography with maps that already feel out of date as borders begin to shift. On Sundays, the town dresses up and walks to the wooden church on the hill, where the pastor prays for peace in a careful voice. After the service, people linger in the churchyard, stamping snow off their boots and sharing rumors in low tones. For fun, you crowd into the school hall when the traveling cinema visits. The projector rattles, the room smells of wool and damp boots, and everyone watches black and white newsreels about distant battles before a light comedy. The quirky detail that sticks in your mind is not the story on screen, but the shabby coat of the man who runs the projector. He lives out of his suitcase, knows the world as flickering light, and is somehow the most glamorous man in town. If you are a kid, you decide that this must be what being cosmopolitan means, having your own projector and not caring if your socks match. In the evenings, you sit close to the iron stove, listening to the wind comb the fjord while the radio murmurs in the corner. Politicians talk about neutrality, about diplomacy, about the dangers of being dragged into conflict. Norway maintains a small army and coastal defenses, but you do not feel like you live in a fortress. You feel like you live on a narrow balcony of rock and forest that someone forgot to move away from the front row of world events. If geography had a personality, Norway would be the quiet neighbor who keeps saying it wants no trouble, yet somehow always discovers the marching band has set up right outside its door. Little signs creep in if you pay attention. The newspapers mention more naval traffic off the coast and more mines in the sea lanes. Export numbers for iron ore and shipping routes show up in dry tables that only a few people read carefully, but they hint at how valuable this coastline really is. You hear about British forces boarding a German ship in Norwegian waters, and people at the cafe argue about whether the government reacted strongly enough. Official statements try to sound firm and calm at the same time, a bit like a parent telling a child that everything is fine while nervously checking the locks on the doors. Historians still argue whether that incident should have been a louder alarm bell for the whole country, or whether most people would have shrugged and gone back to their nets. News from abroad arrives in uneven bursts. Letters from relatives in Denmark or Britain speak about air raid drills, blackouts, and men called up to serve. Radio voices from London and Berlin sound sharper each month. In Norway, there are training camps and debates about defense budgets, but they feel remote from your village. Ordinary people shake their heads, say that politicians will do what politicians do, and go back to their chores. At night, you walk home under a vault of stars. The fjord mirrors a few of them, shivering in the ripples. The village is quiet, only a dog barking once, then twice. From one window, an accordion plays a slow tune, and you let that music rock you into a feeling of safety. You tell yourself that history is something that happens in books, not on your doorstep. Part of you believes that the geography itself is a kind of lullaby that will keep you safe. And yet, if you stand still long enough, listening to the wind from the sea, you can almost hear another sound far away. Engines, steel, voices shouting in a language that is not your own. They are still over the horizon tonight, beyond the map edges in your schoolroom. But they are moving. They are planning. They are coming closer with every tide that slips in and out beneath your feet. You sleep deeply at first, wrapped in the thick quiet of an April night. The stove has gone cold, the last lamp is out, and the only sound is the slow breathing of the house around you. Then a new noise begins to creep in. At first, you think it is just wind on the water. It grows into a low mechanical growl that does not belong to tides or storms. Somewhere, a dog starts barking, and your dream thins and breaks. You wake in the dark. The clock on the wall shows the wrong side of dawn. Your room is a blue shadow, and the air feels different, almost metallic. Outside, you hear more engines now. They build and build, an entire mechanical tide rolling in. You pull on wool socks with clumsy fingers and move to the window. The glass is cold against your forehead as you try to see through the darkness. Down in the harbor, there are shapes that were not there when you fell asleep. Warships sit in the water, darker than the fjord itself, their outlines picked out by a few dim lamps. Searchlights sweep lazily across the hills, then stiffen and hold. You feel a little bolt of panic rush through your chest, fast and bright. Somewhere nearby, a phone begins to ring over and over. The first mainstream fact lands without ceremony. In the early hours of 9 April 1940, German forces begin Operation Weserübung, the surprise assault on Norway and Denmark. You are standing in the middle of it with bed hair. Voices rise from the street as neighbors open their doors, collars up, hair uncombed, boots half-laced. Someone shouts that the Germans are in Oslo. Someone else insists that these ships must be British. People have been arguing about Britain and Germany for months, so of course they continue the habit even with destroyers parked outside the window. Historians still argue whether the government had enough warning to react more effectively, or whether the blitz of diplomatic moves and military deception made a real response almost impossible. At street level, it simply feels like alarm with no clear instructions. You throw on a sweater and join the flow of bodies down toward the quay. The cold hits your face like a slap, and your breath forms quick clouds in front of you. Snow from the last storm lies in dirty ridges along the road. As you round the last bend, you can see soldiers on the deck of a ship, silhouettes against a pale sky. They carry rifles and stand in rigid lines. You notice one of them slip slightly on the icy deck and grab a railing in a very human panic. For 1 second, he looks less like a terrifying invader and more like a man who regrets not buying better boots. Orders snap across the water in sharp German. Boats begin to lower. Small craft churn toward the docks, their wake shining faintly. You hear the clatter of gear, the scrape of metal on wood when they bump against the piers. Officers step onto Norwegian soil, pistols at their belts, and start shouting commands. They march along streets you walked as a child, past the bakery and the post office, as if they rehearsed this route in some distant barracks. The invasion has been planned for months with chilling detail, down to which officers seize which phone exchanges and radio stations. Local soldiers try to respond. You hear later how a few coastal batteries manage to fire, how in Oslo fjord, the fortress at Oscarsborg sinks the heavy cruiser Blucher in the early morning. A dramatic blow that delays the German advance on the capital. You do not see that explosion. What reaches you instead is rumor, carried in gasps through the crowds. In a small, strange touch that people repeat for years, someone swears they watched a German officer pause amid the confusion to pet a curious town cat that wandered into the road. It is not the image anyone expects on invasion day, but the memory refuses to leave. By midday, the town fills with more troops. Trucks roll off ships and snarl their way up narrow streets, engines growling, tires throwing slush. You watch as soldiers unroll cables, set up field telephones, and occupy official buildings. The police station, the telegraph office, the council house, all receive new residents in field grey. Flags with black swastikas climb flagpoles where simple national flags flew yesterday. For a second, the fabric sticks in the cold wind before snapping out fully. You feel your stomach sink as if the air itself has changed taste. Rumors run faster than trucks. Someone says the king and government are gone from Oslo. Someone else claims they have already surrendered, which turns out to be untrue, though it spreads in the way bad news loves to move. Radios crackle with confusing announcements, some official, some improvised. You turn the dial, trying to catch the BBC, twisting through music, static, and frantic Norwegian voices. The air feels packed with invisible signals, all pulling at your nerves. Historians still argue whether more coordination with Britain and France could have saved more ground, or whether geography and naval power made Norway nearly impossible to hold for long. As evening comes, the harbour that once held fishing boats and trading vessels now bristles with grey hulls and guarded gangways. The town is under curfew already, informal at first, then backed by firm orders from patrols in the streets. You slip back to your house, the streets strangely quiet, except for the crunch of boots and the occasional barked command. Indoors, the familiar furniture looks different in the dimming light. The radio sits silent on the shelf. On the table, your breakfast cup still waits in the same place, as if expecting a normal day to arrive late. It does not. You lie down fully dressed, too wired to undress. The house groans softly in the cold, old wood, moving almost like breath. From outside comes the steady thump of marching feet, then the metallic clink of a rifle against a wall. Your mind runs ahead into 100 worrying futures of shortages, arrests, and uniforms on every corner. At the same time, some small, stubborn part of you insists this could all be over quickly, that negotiations will somehow untangle the disaster. You let that thought wrap around you like an extra blanket, thin but better than nothing, as the engines in the fjord vibrate on through the night. Morning arrives grey and thin, as if the daylight itself has lost courage. You wake to a knock at the door and the clink of a metal letterbox. On the kitchen table, next to the breadboard, lies a new envelope with an official stamp on it. The paper is stiff, the ink dark. It smells faintly of damp and bureaucracy. Inside you find instructions that sound simple and heavy at the same time. Report to this office, register for that, bring identification. From now on, many things you used to take for granted come with a number, a stamp, and a long wait in a queue. You step outside, and the town already looks different in daylight. German signs hang under Norwegian ones. Notices are nailed to walls, crisp white on rough wood, with printed orders in 2 languages. No one stops to read them for long. People scan the lines, nod once, and move on, trying to look as if they are on urgent business, even when they are only walking to buy bread. The air has a new sound, the low murmur of worry that never quite fades. At the grocer, you encounter your first full queue of the occupation. It snakes out the door and down the street, a slow-moving river of wool coats and flat caps. Everyone holds small booklets with neatly printed boxes. These are ration cards, and they will soon become as essential as your shoes. A mainstream historical fact settles quietly into your morning. Under German occupation, Norway introduces rationing for food, fuel, clothing, and other essentials, and the system grows stricter as the war goes on. You shuffle forward a few steps at a time, your breath fogging in the cool air. Inside, the shelves look strange. There is still some flour, sugar, and coffee, yet the goods are thinly spread, cans lined up with extra space as if trying to look more numerous. The grocer stamps your card with a tired hand. Each stamp is a tiny subtraction from your freedom to eat what you feel like. You discover that jokes work like a parallel currency. Someone near the front mutters that by the end of the year, the only thing not rationed will be the posters telling you what else is rationed. A couple of people snort softly. Even humor has to be quiet now. Coffee becomes a daily test of optimism. Real imported coffee is scarce, so you learn about substitutes. Roasted barley, chicory root, ground acorns. A quirky detail lodges in your memory when a neighbor swears that if you roast carrot slices until they are nearly black and grind them, they taste exactly like coffee. You try it once. It tastes like warm sadness with a hint of vegetable. Your brain misses the caffeine and your tongue misses the flavor, yet you drink it anyway, because sipping from a cup still feels normal, and the ritual matters as much as the taste. You receive more papers over the next days and weeks. Identification documents must be carried at all times. There are forms for travel permissions, forms for work assignments, forms for things you did not know needed official approval. Offices that once felt sleepy now buzz with clerks and uniformed men. Stamps thump on desks, typewriters clatter, and people stand in lines that seem to reproduce overnight. You start to suspect that if you leave 2 forms alone in a drawer, they will multiply by morning. The police presence becomes more visible, with Norwegian officers and German military police sharing the streets. You walk past patrols that watch you with impassive faces. There is a rule against gathering in groups larger than a certain number, so you learn to break conversations into smaller clusters. 3 people at a corner, 2 more on a bench, 1 pretending to study a shop window while actually listening. The town feels like a puzzle where you constantly try to avoid the wrong combination of pieces. Language shifts as well. German words seep into everyday speech. Verboten, Ausweis, Kommandantur. Children repeat them without fully understanding, in the same way they once tried out slang from foreign films. Historians still argue whether most people complied with the new regulations mainly out of fear, habit, or a calculated belief that staying outwardly obedient would make quiet resistance easier. In your own mind, the motives blur. You follow the rules you must, and quietly bend the ones that feel intolerable. And you do this without giving it noble names. You do it so you can sleep at night and still buy potatoes in the morning. At home, you reorganize your days around shortages. Meals shrink, then become more creative. You learn to stretch flour with potato or fish meal, to use every scrap of fat, to turn yesterday's leftovers into today's main course. Soap becomes a treasure. You slice bars carefully, sometimes marking them with a knife, so no one uses more than their share. Wool clothing is patched until it appears more patch than fabric. When a relative in the countryside sends you butter or meat, you unwrap the parcel with the reverence people once reserved for fine gifts. Entertainment also adjusts to the new rules. Cinemas continue under German censorship, showing approved films and newsreels. Some people keep going, because a dark hall and a story on screen are still an escape. Others boycott them as a matter of principle, or because the idea of laughing at a comedy under occupation feels wrong in their bones. You do something in between. You go sometimes, sit in the back, and watch with a double mind, trying to enjoy the film while analyzing every headline in the newsreel for clues. It is like trying to relax while someone quietly stands behind you holding a clipboard. Curfews carve slices out of the day. You learn to plan errands early, to keep visits short, to glance at the sky and calculate how much light is left. Shops close sooner, streets empty, windows glow behind drawn curtains, private islands in a new sea of rules. At night, you try to keep indoor lights low so they do not spill too brightly into the street. Lamps are shaded, and people grumble good-naturedly that at this rate, no one will see their wrinkles until the war is over, which is at least one upside. Jokes like that are lightweight, yet they float things that might otherwise sink you. On some mornings, civilian life and military machinery collide in absurd ways. You might push a bicycle up a hill while a column of trucks roars past, splashing mud on your trousers. At a crossing, a German sentry stops you to check your papers, and as he examines them, his helmet slips down over one eye, making him look suddenly awkward. For a heartbeat, the balance of power stutters. You both pretend not to notice. The moment passes, and you move on, papers returned, heart a little faster than before. By the time you go to bed now, you are tired in a way that has little to do with physical labor. Your mind spends all day calculating, adjusting, deciding how visible to be in each place. Every errand requires a small strategy. Every cue is a lesson in patience and quiet listening. The sound of your daily life has changed. It is the rustle of ration books, the stamp of boots in slush, the sizzle of something simple frying in a pan that you have carefully counted out. You lie down, close your eyes, and the images drift past you. Posters on walls, empty stretchers on shop shelves, lines of people all holding the same little book of stamps, as if someone has tried to fit an entire country into a series of tidy boxes. You step out your front door one morning and realize your town has quietly changed into a stage where two different plays happen at the same time. One is the old story of Norwegians hurrying to work, hauling fish, delivering milk, gossiping on corners. The other is the new story of German soldiers marching by, rifles on their shoulders, boots hitting the cobbles in strict rhythm. You are standing in the middle where the scripts overlap. Down by the tram stop, uniforms now blend with wool coats. Soldiers with steel helmets and field grey tunics lean against lampposts, smoking or checking watches. Civilians gather with shopping bags and ration cards. The tram rattles up, and everyone shuffles on together. You stand in the aisle next to a German private whose boots look far more polished than your best shoes. He smells of tobacco and leather and a trace of boot polish. You smell of wool, soap that is getting weaker every month, and maybe a hint of fried herring from breakfast. This is what sharing a street looks like now. Everywhere you go, you notice swastika flags. They hang from official buildings, from headquarters erected in hotels, from new poles placed in town squares that once held nothing more threatening than summer bunting. When the wind catches those red banners, they snap loudly, almost like a whip. A mainstream fact hums under these sights. Norway becomes one of the most heavily militarized corners of occupied Europe, with hundreds of thousands of German troops stationed along its coast and towns. The flags are the visible skin of that military weight. On your walk to the market, you pass a checkpoint that did not exist a few weeks earlier. Two soldiers stand beside a wooden barrier, rifles slung, eyeing everyone who comes near. A sign orders you to have your papers ready. You line up behind a fisherman with a basket of cod. Ahead, a young woman hands over her Ausweis. The soldier studies it with intense seriousness, as if this small document might secretly be a novel. He finally nods and waves her through. When it is your turn, you manage a neutral expression somewhere between friendly and blank. The new social skill everyone is practicing. The conversations you overhear in the street become careful dances. Norwegian passers-by lower their voices when they talk about resistance or rumors. Loud complaints are reserved for safer topics like weather or how terrible coffee substitutes are. When German soldiers enter a shop or cafe, the atmosphere shifts almost tangibly. People straighten their backs, adjust their faces, edit their sentences halfway through. It is like someone has suddenly turned up the brightness in a room, and everyone worries what will now be visible. Yet life insists on small, strange encounters. At a bakery, you watch a German soldier fumble with coins, clearly unsure of Norwegian currency. The baker, a stern woman with strong arms, corrects him and counts out the right amount, speaking slowly. He thanks her in awkward Norwegian, mispronouncing the words so badly that two teenagers in the corner almost choke trying not to laugh. For one moment, the occupation becomes a comedy sketch about vowels. The joke does not last, but the memory stays. Some soldiers try to appear friendly. They buy postcards of fjords and mountains, ask about fishing and skiing, attempt a few words of the language. A quirky detail spreads in gossip. Certain German units become known for buying local knitwear. Soldiers send home Norwegian sweaters with elaborate patterns, explaining in letters that these are the warmest things on earth. Somewhere in Germany, babies will be wrapped in wool that smells faintly of sea salt and resistance. Cafes and restaurants now serve mixed crowds. You might sit at a small table, hands curled around a thin cup of ersatz coffee, while a group of German officers occupy a larger table nearby. They talk in low voices, maps sometimes spread out between cups. You listen without meaning to, picking out words like patrol, convoy, sabotage. Messages are everywhere if you are willing to risk hearing them. Historians still argue whether ordinary Norwegians mainly saw these soldiers as individual men doing a job or as a single oppressive machine that had to be resisted in every detail. Some Norwegians interact more willingly. There are shopkeepers who smile easily at German customers, innkeepers who chat with them in fluent German, workers who accept extra pay or better rations in jobs that serve the occupation forces. You see them in the streets and wonder privately where practicality ends and collaboration begins. You also meet German soldiers who clearly hate the cold, miss their homes, and seem more interested in surviving winter than enforcing ideology. The human and the political do not always line up neatly. Children move through this landscape with a different rhythm. They walk to school past guards who sometimes ruffle their hair or hand out candy. That candy becomes the most controversial sweet in town. Parents warn children not to accept it. Children whisper that anyone who takes it is a traitor. At the same time, it is candy in a hungry year. You watch a small boy hesitate, then take a piece, then hide it quickly in his pocket. Morality and sugar are now involved in the same decision. That feels almost unfair. The visual clutter of the occupation continues to grow. Posters appear on walls with slogans in German and Norwegian. Some advertise official cultural events, concerts, lectures that push the idea of shared Nordic heritage under German leadership. Others warn of punishments for sabotage or listening to foreign radio. You pass a wall one day and notice that someone has quietly drawn a tiny symbol near the corner of a poster, a small V for victory, or maybe just a childish scribble. Your pulse jumps anyway. Every mark feels loaded now. Travel through town requires new muscle memory. You automatically glance for patrols before crossing a square. You mentally mark which corners feel safe to stop and chat. You time your walks to avoid known checkpoints when possible. Even your body learns this, adopting a new gait in certain areas, a little more brisk, a little less expressive. It is like having a second personality that only appears when you are within view of a uniform. Sometimes the two worlds collide in odd scenes. On a clear winter day, you might see German soldiers skiing on a hillside near town, laughing and tumbling in the snow, while Norwegian children watch from a distance. The foreign soldiers look, for a moment, like any group of young men enjoying a day off. Then you remember that many of them wear those same uniforms while escorting prisoners or guarding rail lines. The contrast sits in your chest like a stone. On rare evenings, when there is still a bit of electricity to spare, lights in hotel windows glow warmly, and you catch glimpses of German dances or gatherings. Music drifts out, cheerful and strange at the same time. You picture someone upstairs trying to waltz, while the locals below navigate ration lines and curfews. You quietly decide that if history ever writes about mood swings, it should mention this feeling of hearing cheerful accordion music from a building whose basement might hold a jail. By the time darkness settles, the soldiers and swastikas fade into silhouettes. Patrols still walk their routes, boots ringing out on empty streets. You stand behind your curtain for a moment, watching them pass, and then step back into your kitchen where the lamp is shaded and the air smells of boiled potatoes. Your world has narrowed to this room and expanded to include a foreign army at the same time. You sit down at the table, fold your hands, and listen to the overlapping sounds outside and inside. The clack of a rifle against a lamppost, a spoon against a cup, two realities sharing the same narrow street. You wake one cold morning and realize the occupation has created a new kind of neighbor, not just the one who borrows sugar and never returns the jar, but the one who walks to work a little taller, comes home later, and suddenly has opinions that sound suspiciously like official announcements. In hallways and stairwells, a name rides on low voices. Quisling. When you whisper it, it feels like a sour taste that will not rinse away. Posters appear on walls and notice boards, printed in sharp ink. National Samling, the Norwegian Fascist Party, calls meetings, promises renewal, speaks of duty and destiny. Vidkun Quisling appears in photographs, thin-faced and serious, presenting himself as the man who will lead Norway safely under German protection. The mainstream fact lands with a thud in the newspapers. A collaborationist government forms around Quisling and his party, backed by German power at every turn. On paper, it looks orderly. On your street, it looks like a fault line splitting open under everyday life. You begin to notice who attends the meetings. A clerk from the municipal office puts on his best coat and walks briskly toward the assembly hall. A shopkeeper, who used to grumble about all politicians, now wears a tiny party pin on his lapel. A quiet classmate from your school days suddenly stands at street corners, handing out leaflets, hair carefully slicked back. No one announces that they have chosen a side, yet their steps, their pins, their new friends say it clearly enough. In living rooms and kitchens, conversation bends around this new reality. At a family gathering, someone brings up the latest speech from Oslo. Another person coughs loudly and steers the talk back to fishing or knitting. Faces tighten, eyes meet for a second too long. You can feel people mentally sorting the room into categories. Safe to talk with, safe to smile at. Do not say anything important near that one. The air thickens without anyone raising their voice. One evening, you sit at a kitchen table with a chipped cup of coffee substitute while relatives argue quietly. An uncle insists that joining the party is simply practical. Better to stand close to power, he says, to protect the family and secure rations or work. A cousin across from him stares in open disgust, calling any support for Quisling treachery dressed up in polite language. You sit between them, feeling the table grow longer with every word. It occurs to you that there is no neutral chair here anymore. You either lean a little one way or the other, even if you say nothing. The word Quisling begins to travel beyond Norway, used abroad as a term for traitor, but for you, it is not yet an abstract insult. It is the man whose portrait appears beside official decrees, and it is also the neighbor who suddenly gets extra coal or meat, the boss who smirks when others keep their mouths shut. Historians still argue whether most party members are firm believers in fascist ideas or mostly opportunists who persuade themselves that going along is the safest choice. From your vantage point, motives blur together. You see ambition, fear, conviction, and hunger all wearing the same badge. A quirky detail creeps into clothing. Party members love their pins and armbands, those small flashes of color that announce loyalty. In response, some Norwegians begin quietly wearing paper clips on their jackets or tiny pieces of jewelry that hint at support for the king and the government in exile. A plain metal clip suddenly becomes a soft protest. You develop a new habit of reading lapels as carefully as you once read headlines. One tiny gleam of metal can feel more comforting than a whole speech. Institutions flex and creak under the pressure. Certain newspapers adapt quickly, printing editorials that praise the new leadership and scold so-called defeatists. Others are shut down or gently replaced with more obedient editors. Civil servants weigh their options. A few refuse outright and lose positions. Others stay, telling themselves that it is better if someone with a conscience remains at the desk where papers are stamped. Collaboration in the corridors of power often looks like someone simply signing their name in the right box. Whispers about informers coil through the town, even when no one speaks their names. You hear that in another district, a man was arrested after grumbling about Germans in a cafe, his words apparently walking away in the ears of a helpful listener. The idea that any conversation might grow legs and report to the authorities changes how you speak. Even jokes are cut into smaller pieces, shared only with those whose reactions you know by heart. Silence becomes not just absence of talk, but an active safety measure. At church, tension sits in the pews along with the congregation. Some clergy try to keep sermons strictly spiritual, focusing on patience and comfort. Others lean closer to the edge, hinting that obedience to conscience outweighs obedience to any earthly ruler. When known party members enter, their armbands and pins draw invisible circles around them. Hymns and prayers still rise together, yet you can sense the heavy lines of mistrust running up and down the aisle. Workplaces turn into careful stages. A foreman who joins Nationale Samling suddenly has better access to supplies and German offices. Do you nod more politely now to keep your job? Do you let your face show what you feel and risk being marked as unreliable? Some colleagues laugh at his jokes and compliment his new contacts. Others answer in the shortest possible sentences, voices flat, eyes guarded. Every exchange feels like a small test, whose results you will not see until much later. Children, as usual, ask what adults avoid. A child points at a man with a party badge and asks in a clear voice whether he is good or bad. Parents hush the question, mumble something about grown-up choices, and hurry the child along. In schoolyards, new nicknames appear. Some children brag about uncles in the new police force and are praised or mocked depending on the crowd. Others quietly refuse to join German-sponsored youth activities and pay for it with teasing. War and politics slip into playground games with unnerving ease. Social circles rearrange like furniture in a cramped room. Some people stop visiting certain houses. Others choose their guests more carefully. You find yourself rehearsing the guest list in your head before organizing even a small gathering. If you invite this neighbor and that cousin, will the talk stay safe? Will someone mention the wrong person in the wrong tone? Hospitality no longer feels carefree. It feels strategic. A series of soft loyalty tests conducted over thin soup and black bread. Every now and then, you witness a scene that sharpens everything. In a town square, a party speaker addresses a small crowd about the bright future under new leadership. A few people clap out of duty or curiosity. Others keep walking without looking up. At the edge of the group, an old woman with a shopping basket pauses just long enough to shake her head the smallest amount. When your eyes meet hers, the gesture feels louder than the applause. By the time you head home in the late afternoon, your mind is full of faces. The clerk with the fresh pin, the uncle making excuses, the neighbor who took down a picture of the king and left the wall blank. You realize that the occupation is no longer just foreign guns in the street. It lives now in the small decisions your neighbors make, in the quiet changes of tone at family dinners, in the sideways glances that weigh every choice. You undress by the fading light, slide under your blanket, and lie listening to the house creak. The map of trust in your town has been redrawn, even though every street still lies exactly where it did yesterday. You stand at the kitchen sink one evening, hands in warm dishwater, while the real work of the occupation happens at the table behind you. No one calls it resistance out loud. On the surface, it is just coffee substitute in, chipped cups, a pot of fish stew, and a few neighbors dropping by to share news. Under that plain layer, messages move, names are weighed, and a different map of the town is drawn with every whispered sentence. The kitchen becomes the safest room because it looks so ordinary. Pots hang on the wall, a towel dries near the stove, and the smell of boiled potatoes lingers in the air. When someone knocks at the door, you automatically sweep loose papers into a drawer and set a breadboard on top. Officially, you are just preparing supper. Unofficially, you are developing a talent for rearranging incriminating evidence at impressive speed. If there were Olympic medals for casual hiding, this household might at least reach the finals. At the table sit people who have known each other for years. A teacher with ink-stained fingers, a fisherman whose hands look permanently salt-burned, a student home from the city. On another night, it might be a pastor, a shop assistant, a mechanic who can fix almost anything that has gears. Everyone seems to be doing something ordinary: knitting, peeling potatoes, sharpening a pencil. Conversation drifts from weather to work, to which neighbor is expecting a baby. Tucked quietly between those topics are the real points: a new leaflet that needs distributing, a contact in another town, a German supply depot that looks suspiciously vulnerable. The mainstream fact sits quietly at the center of these evenings. Throughout occupied Norway, resistance groups form, some tied to national organizations like Milorg, others loose local circles focused on sabotage, information, or helping people escape. From the outside, these gatherings look like friends having coffee. From the inside, every shared glance carries an extra meaning. Paper is precious, so nothing is wasted. Old calendars become note sheets. Margins of newspapers fill with tiny pencil marks. Grocery lists hide fragments of codes. The illegal newspapers that circulate are slim and fragile, printed in basements or back rooms on presses that sound far too loud when the streets outside fall quiet. When one arrives, flattened under loaves of bread or folded inside an innocent announcement, the room brightens. People lean close, reading about Allied advances, government statements from abroad, or local acts of sabotage that the censored press never mentions. Quirky habits creep into the work. Someone hides documents inside flour sacks because no one enjoys poking through raw flour for secrets. Another person always places a teaspoon slightly askew on the saucer when a meeting topic turns dangerous, so anyone arriving late can take one look at the table and know how careful to be. In one house, the family cat becomes an accidental security alarm. Whenever strangers approach, it jumps from windowsill to floor and races for the space under the stove, claws skittering on the boards. You slowly learn that if the cat runs, you should stop talking. Trust becomes the main currency. You do not ask many direct questions. Instead, you pay attention to behavior: who keeps their word, who panics when a knock sounds at the door, who repeats stories after being told not to. An invitation to join a serious task is not delivered as a speech. It might be a simple request to stay behind after the other guests leave and help tidy up. Standing amid crumbs and cups, you are quietly asked whether you are willing to do something slightly more risky than peeling potatoes. One night, a guest arrives with a bulky object wrapped in cloth. When it is unwrapped on the table, you see a radio set, familiar and dangerous. Listening to foreign broadcasts in occupied Norway is forbidden. The set glows faintly when switched on, its tubes warming with a soft hum. The volume is kept low. You lean in, almost holding your breath, as a voice in Norwegian reaches you from London. The broadcaster speaks about battles, about the government in exile, about hope. You feel that hope settle in your chest like a new coal in the stove. The risk is real. Raids do happen. People are caught with illegal papers or radios and face arrest, interrogation, prison, or worse. Stories of such arrests travel quickly, thickening the silence around risky topics. Yet the work continues because something in you refuses to accept that uniforms and posters get the final say. Historians still argue whether the scale of Norwegian resistance efforts significantly altered the military situation or primarily shaped the later story people tell themselves about courage under occupation. In your kitchen, that debate sounds remote. Here, resistance is measured in scraped knuckles, smudged ink, sleepless nights, and the simple decision to keep opening the door when the right people knock. Sometimes, unexpectedly, laughter hits the room with surprising force. Someone tells a joke about a pompous local official. Someone else does an uncanny impression of a stiff German officer, complete with exaggerated mustache and stiff walk. People laugh too loudly, then clamp down quickly, glancing at the window. Humor becomes a pressure valve, letting off steam before it cracks the pot. You get good at laughing with your mouth and then turning serious with your eyes. A strange new skill you never thought you would need. By the time the evening is over, the kitchen looks again like any other kitchen. Papers are hidden, cups are washed and set to dry. A pot of stew has been reduced to a thin ring around the inside of the pan. You blow out the lamp and stand for a moment in the dark, listening to the quiet. Somewhere down the street, a patrol passes, boot steps fading into the night. In your pocket is a shopping list that contains, in the third item, instructions about a meeting 2 days from now. You fold the paper more tightly, feel its edge against your fingers, and know that when the time comes, this ordinary kitchen will open again into a very unordinary night. You sit in a wooden school desk that has seen more carvings than carpentry in its lifetime. The air smells of chalk, dust, damp wool, and that special kind of boredom that hangs over any classroom just before something important happens. On the wall, the portrait of the king has quietly disappeared, leaving a pale rectangle where the sun did not reach for years. In its place hangs a new symbol that means nothing to you except that someone else is in charge of the nails. Your teacher walks in with a stack of papers that looks too thin to be normal homework. His face is tighter than usual, his shoulders a little higher. The chatter dies down without anyone needing to be told. He places the papers on the desk, folds his hands for a moment, and looks at you all with a kind of careful softness that makes your stomach twist. New regulations for schools are arriving from the authorities. The curriculum is supposed to include more ideological content, more loyalty to the new order, more praise for leaders you did not vote for. Teachers are expected to join specific organizations and spread messages that fit the party line. The mainstream fact cuts through the chalk dust. In 1942, thousands of Norwegian teachers refused to join the Nazi-controlled teachers' union and resist imposed curricula, leading to mass arrests and deportations to forced labor camps. You are sitting with one of those teachers, even if no one has written that on the blackboard. He begins to speak, voice calm but firm. He explains that there are new demands about what he should teach and which organizations he should join. Then he says, in words chosen with care, that his loyalty is to his conscience, to the children in the room, and to the profession he trained for, not to any party badge. He will not change his lessons into propaganda. He will not sign the papers they want. It is the closest thing you have heard to open defiance spoken in daylight. Your chest feels too small for your heart. You watch your classmates react. One girl stares straight ahead, gripping her pencil as if it might break. A boy in the back looks toward the door, as if he expects someone in uniform to appear immediately. Another student has tears in his eyes and does not seem to know why. When you glance outside, you see nothing but grey sky and bare branches. The world looks ordinary, while something brave and dangerous settles over the room like a second ceiling. Across the country, classrooms turn into quiet fronts. Some teachers give in, join the union, adjust their lessons. Others drag their feet, stall, pretend to misunderstand instructions. Many stand firm. The response from above is swift. Arrests begin. One morning, instead of your usual teacher, A stranger in uniform appears at the front of the room, reading out names of staff who will not be returning. The empty desk on the platform looks heavier than any piece of furniture has a right to be. Historians still argue whether this wave of teacher resistance had more impact as a practical obstacle to indoctrination, or as a powerful symbol that helped Norwegians tell themselves a story of moral backbone in later years. The churches feel their own pressure. The authorities want sermons that fit easily beside official speeches. Loyalty to the new order presented as godly duty. In parsonages and sacristies, clergy gather, voices low, papers spread out on tables that usually hold hymnals and candles. You sit in the back pew one Sunday, as the pastor reads a pastoral letter prepared by church leaders. The words are careful and measured. They talk about conscience, about the limits of obedience to earthly powers, about the duty to protect the vulnerable. The conclusion is clear enough, even if half the sentences are wrapped in Bible verses. The church cannot bend as far as the authorities want without snapping something essential. Within weeks, many bishops and pastors are removed from their official positions or step down rather than comply. Yet, they often continue to preach and minister in unofficial spaces, in borrowed halls or private homes. The Church of Norway begins to act as a parallel institution that answers to conscience and faith rather than the occupation government. A quirky detail catches your eye in one countryside parish. People begin to carry their old confirmation Bibles wrapped in brown paper, not to protect them from rain, but to avoid awkward questions about certain passages that pastors have been delivering with unusual emphasis. Faith and fear twist together in people's thoughts. Some worshippers fear that open resistance will bring more punishment. Others fear that silence will wound their souls. Sitting on hard wooden pews, you hear prayers that sound like coded messages. Phrases about justice and truth suddenly feel dangerous. Hymns that talk about a kingdom not of this world take on a sharp new edge. A simple line about light shining in darkness can make your throat close. Schools and churches are not the only places where saying no happens. Cultural organizations, theater groups, sports clubs, all receive letters encouraging them to join new structures aligned with the occupation. Some comply out of caution or hunger. Others quietly disband rather than become tools for propaganda. A local choir chooses a middle path. Officially it continues, singing approved songs at approved events. Unofficially, rehearsals end with a soft chorus of forbidden verses once the doors are shut and the curtains drawn. You stand in a back row one evening, voice shaking as you join in, and realize that singing can feel like smuggling. In one town, teachers develop a silent protest that spreads like a secret handshake. On certain days, they all arrive at school wearing plain black clothing as a sign of grief for lost freedoms. No one announces it publicly. Students notice anyway and copy them, showing up with dark scarves or ribbons. Looking down a street filled with black coats and hats, you feel that someone has turned mourning into a language you can read from the window. Of course, not every act of refusal is grand. Some are small and stubborn. A pastor refuses to announce certain official news from the pulpit. A teacher insists on keeping a particular poem in the syllabus, even though it talks too much about freedom. A librarian misplaces propaganda pamphlets at the bottom of drawers while guiding readers toward other shelves. These small acts do not make headlines, but they shape how people move through their days. There is a cost. Houses are searched, telephones tapped, meetings watched. Teachers who stand firm are arrested, taken away in trucks that rattle down village roads while children watch in stunned silence. Some spend months in camps, forced to perform hard labor in snow and wind, bones aching, stomachs growling. When a few return, thinner and older in the eyes, they carry themselves with a quiet that is almost heavier than words. You meet one such teacher on the street, carrying a worn briefcase. His coat hangs looser than before. He lifts his hat in greeting and asks how your studies go, as if nothing has changed. You answer with too much enthusiasm, hoping your smile can stand in for all the thank yous that feel too dangerous to say out loud. At night, when the town falls quiet, You think about these adults who choose to stand in the path of pressure instead of stepping aside. They are not soldiers. They do not carry weapons. Their battlefields are blackboards, pulpits, stages, and office desks. Yet their refusal reshapes the space you live in. Because they say no to certain demands, you still read certain books, still hear certain hymns, still learn that conscience must answer to something higher than convenience. You pull your blanket up to your chin and imagine those classrooms and churches emptied of their familiar faces. The thought is colder than the winter wind outside the window, and you find yourself hoping that stubbornness can be as strong as any wall, even if it looks like nothing more than a teacher standing in front of a class with a piece of chalk in his hand. You open the morning paper and feel like you have accidentally walked into a theater where someone else is writing all the scripts. The headlines stare back with a confidence that does not match what people actually whisper in doorways. Victories are always impressive. Difficulties are always under control. Leaders are always wise and farsighted. You sip your thin coffee and think that reality clearly did not get to proofread this edition. The newspaper looks familiar at first glance. Same masthead, same columns, same ads for boots that you cannot afford, and coffee that no longer tastes like coffee. Underneath that shell, the content has changed. Articles about politics now sound strangely similar, no matter who supposedly wrote them. Phrases appear again and again. Friendship, new order, common destiny. Somewhere in town sits a censorship office where men in uniforms and suits read proofs and remove the parts they do not like. A mainstream fact sits behind your breakfast. Under occupation, Norwegian newspapers and the national broadcaster are tightly controlled, with editors forced to print approved material and steer clear of forbidden topics. You learn to read between the lines. When the paper uses the word calm 3 times in one article, you assume something is anything but calm. When the official reports say there is no reason to worry about food supplies, you discreetly check how many potatoes are left in the cellar. You also notice what never appears: names of certain people who were arrested, reports of Allied victories that are too large to spin, stories of resistance. Silence becomes its own kind of headline if you train your eyes to see it. Posters bloom on walls like loud weeds. They show smiling workers, heroic soldiers, strong young people marching into a radiant future under helpful slogans. The fonts are bold, the colors are bright. You know from your own sore feet that real work rarely looks that tidy. Some posters advertise official film nights. The newsreels before the movie are supposed to educate you. They show parades, factories, disciplined troops. In the dark cinema, you watch these images with a strange double mind. Part of you tracks the story. Another part carefully listens to the coughs, snorts, and muffled laughs of the audience around you. Those small sounds tell you more about what people think than any voiceover. Radio becomes a battlefield you cannot see. Official Norwegian broadcasts now carry the occupation line. The voices sound smooth. The music is pleasant. Yet as evening falls across the country, countless hands reach for radio dials and push them past the safe stations. In your own home, the set sits in a corner, covered with a cloth when not in use. Listening to foreign radio is illegal. The penalty can be harsh. That risk turns the simple act of tuning into London into something that makes your pulse race. You wait until the streets outside are quiet. Curtains are drawn. Lamps are shaded. Someone checks the hallway twice. Then the cloth comes off and the knob turns slowly. Static rushes in like a storm. You navigate through it, searching for a familiar call sign. The moment the BBC voice breaks through, speaking Norwegian from far away, you feel your shoulders drop a little in relief. The announcer talks about battles that the local papers mention only in passing or twist into something more flattering. You hear the names of Norwegian ships and units working with the Allies, names that the official broadcasts pretend do not exist. The room feels briefly bigger than the walls around you. Not everyone has a radio, so information spreads by word of mouth. Someone who listened last night quietly recounts what they heard to friends at work or neighbors in a queue. It is easy to spot them if you know what to look for. They lean closer, they lower their voices. They start sentences with things like, "I heard from a reliable source." You nod along, knowing that the reliable source spent half an hour hunched over a radio under a blanket. Historians still argue whether the majority of Norwegians believed official broadcasts, privately trusted foreign stations more, or mostly focused on immediate concerns like food and safety, and treated all big political news as distant thunder. Quirks grow up around secret listening sessions. In one family, the youngest child gets the job of lookout because kids can pretend to be innocent more convincingly. She sits on the stairs with a knitting project and a serious expression, ready to knock over a broom if unfamiliar footsteps approach. In another house, the father insists on placing a thick pillow behind the radio to muffle any stray sound that might escape through the thin walls. You suspect that anyone standing close enough outside to hear a muffled BBC broadcast through plaster would also hear your pounding heart. But the pillow is considered essential. Parody becomes a quiet weapon. Official songs and slogans are mocked in kitchens and barns, their words twisted into jokes that spread faster than posters can be glued to walls. A marching tune that plays on the radio acquires new lyrics about shortages and clumsy officials. People sing the altered version under their breath while chopping wood or stirring soup. It is a small act, but it feels like turning the volume knob of power down a notch. Censorship reaches into private letters as well. Foreign mail is restricted and examined. Even domestic letters can pass through hands that are not friendly. People adapt by writing in codes that look like everyday talk. "I hope the fish are biting" can mean that a plan is moving forward. "Aunt is feeling better" might signal that someone made it safely across a border. You read your own letter drafts and realize that you have begun to write as if a stranger is always in the room with you. Eyes on every line. The occupation authorities also try to win hearts, not just silence mouths. They sponsor cultural events, sports competitions, youth camps, all with carefully placed messages about unity and strength. Some people attend for the food or the chance to get out of the house. Others refuse, seeing any participation as a compromise. You might find yourself at a sports field one afternoon, cheering quietly for a local team, while a bland speech about a bright future drones from a loudspeaker. The wind mercifully carries away half the words. Within this noisy mix, truth becomes a patchwork quilt stitched together from many scraps. A neighbor repeats something they heard from a policeman. A cousin in another town sends a letter with odd phrasing. The illegal paper in your kitchen reports an Allied victory. The official paper barely mentions it. The BBC gives more detail. You assemble these pieces into a rough picture. It is not perfect. It shifts constantly, yet it feels more solid than any cartoonishly confident headline. Sometimes, propaganda stumbles into unintentional comedy. A poster depicts smiling workers with full lunch pails in a factory that looks suspiciously warm and well lit. You look at your own lunch of thin soup and your workplace with its drafty windows and share a silent eye roll with a colleague. At a film night, the newsreel tries to present a military setback as a strategic relocation. A man in the row behind you whispers that he also strategically relocates from the table when his wife serves turnip stew again. You choke back a laugh louder than you intended. The person sitting next to you nudges your elbow in warning, and you suddenly remember that jokes can have consequences. At the end of the day, you turn off the radio, fold the illegal paper into careful squares and tuck it away, and stack the official newspaper in the corner, knowing you will probably use it to light the stove. Words, which once felt like simple tools for telling stories, now come in different grades of danger. Some burn quickly and brightly. Some smolder for days in memory. You blow out the lamp and lie in the dark, listening to the faint hum in your ears, after hours of whispers and static. Somewhere out beyond the sea, transmitters keep broadcasting into the night. Somewhere close by, sensors sleep with ink-stained fingers. You drift into a tired half-sleep between those two steady signals. You live in a building where sound travels too well. Pipes rattle when anyone turns a tap. Footsteps echo up from the entrance like small earthquakes. Doors never quite manage to close quietly. That is why, on a certain autumn night, you notice the difference right away. The footsteps are faster, heavier, not the familiar shuffle of neighbors with shopping bags or firewood. Voices bounce up the stairwell in short, clipped phrases that do not belong to friendly visits. Your heart climbs into your throat before you even sit up in bed. You move to the doorway and peer through the crack. On the landing below, uniformed men stand outside a door you know by heart. It is the apartment of a Jewish family you see at the market, on the tram, near the synagogue, on festival days. You remember the little boy who always carried a book that seemed bigger than his chest, walking very seriously as if he might drop history itself. Now his home is ringed with boots and leather belts and the dull shine of metal. Even without catching every shouted word, you know what is happening. Someone, somewhere, has decided that these neighbors are no longer simply neighbors. The arrests are not random. Lists have been prepared in quiet offices. Names and addresses have been pulled from population registers, synagogue rolls, and police files. The mainstream fact that history will later record is simple and cold. In 1942, Norwegian police and officials helped German forces to arrest and deport Jewish families. Hundreds taken in coordinated sweeps from homes, streets, and temporary holding centers. You watch a small piece of that pattern unfold on your own narrow staircase. A door finally opens. Voices rise. There is the brief, raw protest of someone who thought that citizenship, paying taxes, and minding their own business would somehow act as armor. Cupboard doors slam. Drawers scrape across wood. A suitcase is dragged out and half-filled while officers glance at watches. In the dim hall, you catch a glimpse of faces. A mother still in her nightgown, hair hastily wrapped in a scarf. A boy clutching a small bag, eyes impossibly wide. A father trying to stand very straight while his hands tremble. One of the officers wears a Norwegian uniform under German orders and seems unable to meet anyone's eyes. Another keeps checking a typed list as if the paper itself is in charge, and he is only the delivery system. The family is marched down the stairs. The sound of their steps blends with your own in memory, long after they vanish into the dark. When silence finally returns, it feels heavier than the noise. The next day, their door is closed, the nameplate still in place, a little rectangle of metal that suddenly looks unbearably fragile. Rumors move through the building, then through town. You hear that groups of Jews were taken to a harbor, held under guard and loaded onto ships for transport south and east to camps people only speak of in fragments. Very few ever come back. Historians still argue whether more open protest from the wider Norwegian public and churches could have slowed or disrupted these deportations, or whether the machinery of occupation and collaboration was already too tight by the time most people fully understood the danger. For you, all that future debate shrinks into the fact of an empty apartment with curtains that will never open again. Fear thickens after nights like that. You begin to notice informers the way sailors notice hidden reefs. You do not always know for sure who they are. Sometimes it is just a feeling. A man who listens more than he talks in the cafe. A woman who always seems to know who visited which house and at what time. There are paid informers, eager ideological ones, and frightened people who hope information will buy them safety. The result is the same. Casual remarks can echo into interrogation rooms. A joke told to the wrong person can turn into a file on someone's desk. You start handling your own sense of humor like explosives, useful in small amounts and very carefully stored. Because of that, helping anyone becomes a serious decision. And yet help keeps finding paths like water, seeking every crack and seam it can. Some Norwegians quietly begin to assist Jewish neighbors in reaching neutral Sweden. The journeys are not heroic in the storybook sense. They use ordinary means that blend into ordinary life. Trains crowded with workers, delivery carts piled with firewood, fishing boats that smell fiercely of their last catch. You hear stories in whispers over kitchen tables. A family hides beneath sacks in a lorry, lying so still that pins and needles in their legs feel like fire. A teenage guide leads a small group through forest paths at night, counting steps between landmarks because using a flashlight would be foolish. A quirky tale circulates about refugees who ride to the border in a fishing boat packed with barrels of herring, emerging hours later so soaked in brine that the first thing they do in Sweden is beg for fresh clothes and a bath. If there is any justice in the universe, you decide, they never have to eat pickled fish again unless they really want to. The escape routes north and east weave through forests, across lakes, and over barely marked farm tracks. Guides who know the terrain lead small groups in darkness, avoiding main roads whenever possible. You walk with them in your imagination, feeling twigs snap underfoot, breath clouding in the cold air, ears tuned for any sound of engines or barking dogs. Sometimes the guides are paid. Sometimes they are simply stubborn people who cannot endure the thought of friends being loaded onto trains. The dangers go beyond patrols. Sudden storms, weak ankles, loose talk in the wrong farmhouse. Every successful crossing feels like a fragile miracle stitched from planning, courage, and luck. Deciding whom to trust becomes an art and a gamble. A Jewish family considering escape must weigh each potential contact. The doctor who has always been kind but now seems watched. The bus driver who looks away when officials board. The neighbor who never speaks loudly but leaves fresh bread on the doorstep and lingers just long enough to ask one careful question. You picture yourself at that kitchen table, mapping faces in your mind, trying to read small signals of decency that are suddenly worth more than any amount of money. Not everyone helps. Some look away and mutter that there is nothing they can do. Some repeat official lines about law and order, even when those laws reach into cradles. A few profit openly, taking over businesses, apartments, or possessions left behind. You walk past a shop one morning that has changed hands overnight. The new sign is neat. The window display is tidy. The silence behind the glass is louder than anything arranged on its shelves. It is the kind of shop where you feel colder when you come out than when you went in, even if you never touched the door. There are also painful stories of betrayal that grow out of fear rather than greed. A person caught with illegal papers may be offered leniency in exchange for names. A clerk confronted with threats against a child may reveal information they swore to keep secret. Historians still argue whether most informers were driven more by ideology, opportunism, or sheer terror. On your street, the result feels the same. Conversations shrink. People lower their eyes when certain footsteps approach. Trust, once broken, leaves a sticky residue on every wall. Yet even in this climate, small kindnesses flash out like matches in the dark. Someone leaves a coat on a bench, just as a person in thin clothing passes. A farmer adds extra potatoes to a sack without counting too closely. A railway worker looks the other way when a passenger's papers do not perfectly match their face, then loudly complains about the weather to cover the silence. These gestures do not stop the trains or empty the camps, but they push back against the machinery in tiny increments. You collect these moments in your mind like pocket stones, small and solid, so that not every memory of this time is made of boots and shouting. At night, when the building is finally quiet, you think of the family from the landing. You picture not just the moment of their removal, but ghost images of another possible path. A warning given days earlier, a bed offered in an attic, a seat in a boat heading toward a dark shoreline, and a narrow gap in a border fence. You cannot rewrite their story. You can only let their absence sharpen your sense of what is at stake the next time. Footsteps in the stairwell sound wrong, or someone at your table whispers that they need help. You lie awake longer these nights, listening. Every creak becomes a possible knock at someone's door. Every car that pauses outside makes your muscles tense. You remind yourself that fear can be useful if it keeps you alert and willing to act. It can also thicken into a heavy blanket that keeps you from moving at all. Somewhere between those two extremes, you have to find a place to stand where you can hear the stairs, protect your own family as best you can, and still decide who you want to be when someone needs you to open your door. And if your heart thumps so loudly you can hear it in your ears, at least you never have to wonder whether history is happening in your building. Your nervous system sends hourly updates. You wake before dawn to a different kind of alarm. No boots on the stairs today, just the distant hoot of a ship in the fjord and the low hum of engines that never really stop anymore. You pull on rough work clothes that always smell faintly of salt and machine oil and step outside into air that tastes like metal and seaweed. Your town has become part of a long supply chain, and you are about to spend another day helping keep it moving whether you want to or not. Orders came weeks ago. Men of certain ages must report for labor duty, women too in many places. Some go to nearby projects and can still sleep in their own beds. Others are sent to remote stretches of coastline where there are more gulls than houses. The official phrase is service to the community. The unofficial truth is that you are repairing and building things that help the occupiers move troops and cargo safely. A blunt fact hangs over every worksite map pinned to the wall. The German war effort leans heavily on Norway as a base for naval units, convoys, and airfields, and the occupying forces push thousands of locals and prisoners into labor to strengthen these positions. Today, your assignment is on a wind-swept headland where the land drops sharply into dark water. The road out there barely deserves the name. It twists between rocks and scraggly trees, rutted and icy in winter, muddy in the thaw. You ride in the back of a truck with other workers, bodies swaying as the vehicle lurches through potholes. No one talks much at first. Breath steams into the cold air, forming little clouds that vanish quickly. Someone coughs. Someone else mutters a short complaint about the benches, and a dry laugh ripples through the group. At the site, you see concrete forms rising from blasted rock. These will become bunkers and gun positions, part of a long chain of coastal defenses that creeps along the shoreline. There are warehouses near sheltered coves and crude piers jutting into the water. Convoy ships need docks, fuel stores, and repair stations. Your tools are simple: shovels, picks, wheelbarrows with squeaky wheels, cement mixers that roar and rattle and seem determined to throw bolts at the worst possible moment. You spend hours moving stones from one pile to another, pouring concrete, reinforcing edges, throwing your back into tasks that feel designed to exhaust you more than any machine ever could. The wind is a constant presence. It cuts through whatever layers of clothing you manage to find and throws grit into your eyes. In winter, it carries snow that stings your skin. In summer, it brings clouds of midges that feel personal in their attacks. A quirky bit of worksite folklore appears. Someone claims that if you smear goose fat on your cheeks, the wind will bite less and the insects will slide right off. Another person tries it and spends the day smelling like a roast dinner, while midges pester him anyway. The only real effect is that the guard dog follows him everywhere, with deep interest. Guard towers watch over the site. Uniformed men stand with binoculars and rifles, scanning sea and sky as well as the workers below. They worry about Allied planes and submarines. You worry about frostbite and falling rocks. Every now and then, the distant thump of depth charges, or the drone of aircraft rolls in from somewhere beyond the horizon. It reminds you that the structures you build are not just useless monuments. They will serve real ships, real weapons, real patrols on a sea where lives end abruptly. You share your labor with others who have far less choice than you. Prisoners of war, especially from the east, wear thinner clothes and carry heavier loads. Their faces are hollow, eyes sunken, movement slow with hunger. Some guards treat them like beasts of burden. Others look away in uneasy silence. You slip a crust of bread or a boiled potato to one of them when the foreman turns his back. For a moment the man's eyes meet yours with a spark that looks almost like surprise. You feel both proud and ashamed that such a tiny act feels so huge. The work rhythm is simple and cruel. Lift, carry, dig, pour. The muscles in your shoulders ache constantly. Blisters become calluses. Calluses crack in the cold and bleed. You learn small tricks to ease the strain. How to position your hands on the shovel. How to wedge a stone so the next load takes less effort. How to stretch your back in fleeting seconds of rest so you can keep moving when the whistle blows. Historians still argue whether this forced labor significantly increased the occupiers' defensive strength, or whether the enormous resources poured into concrete along the coast were a strategic overreaction driven by fear of invasion. At midday, you crouch behind a pile of rocks to eat. The meal is simple: bread that crumbles if you look at it too hard, and something pretending to be sausage. Steam rises from your cup of hot liquid that calls itself coffee out of sheer optimism. Nearby, the guards eat from tin containers, their portions only slightly less depressing than yours. You notice how even they glance toward the horizon, as if calculating how long this assignment will last. No one quite feels at home out here, not even the ones holding rifles. Conversations during breaks reveal a strange mix of resignation and quiet defiance. One man complains about the endless concrete and says that if anyone ever writes a poem about this landscape, they should mention how it now smells of cement instead of pine. Another mutters that he shifts a stone twice as slowly whenever he thinks a particular officer is watching, his own tiny way of wasting their time. A third worker talks about rumors of Allied convoys in the north and battles over sea lanes. Information trickles in from sailors, from radio listeners, from letters. You piece together a mental map of ships slipping through dark waters, some escorted by the very installations you help maintain. Sometimes the sea itself stages a protest. A sudden storm batters the coastline, waves smashing against unfinished piers and tearing away planks that took days to nail down. You watch plumes of spray leap higher than the lookout towers and secretly cheer each time the water claims a piece of new construction. Of course, rebuilding follows. You get double the work for the same rations, and the officers double the inspections. Still, for one raw afternoon, you get to see nature remind everyone who actually owns this shoreline. Travel to and from these sites can be as draining as the work itself. In bad weather, the trucks struggle on narrow roads. Landslides are not uncommon. Once the whole group has to climb out and push the vehicle backward, away from a section of road that suddenly crumbles toward the fjord. The driver crosses himself 3 times and refuses to light his usual cigarette after that, convinced he has used up a week's worth of luck in one morning. Farther north, other workers tell of even harsher conditions. In some regions, people build airfields on permafrost, dig tunnels through unforgiving rock, and lay tracks across snow that never seems to melt. Stories circulate about foreign prisoners forced to work until they collapse, their bodies buried in embankments and under roads. Those tales are told in low voices, often at night, and no one is entirely sure which details are true. Yet when you stand on a newly carved embankment and look down at your boots, you cannot shake the feeling that the earth itself has absorbed more than just sweat. By the time your shift ends, the headland glows with the dull color of wet concrete and disturbed soil. The structures look ugly and strong, like scars that have not yet healed. You climb back into the truck, legs heavy, hands numb despite gloves. The engine coughs to life, and the vehicle turns back toward town. As the coastline scrolls past in the fading light, you see more work sites on distant points, more cranes, more scaffolding, more human figures reduced to dots against rock and sky. You know that each pier, bunker, and fuel depot makes it easier for convoys to slip in and out of the fjords, for submarines to refit, for planes to refuel. You also know that one day, perhaps sooner than anyone here admits, these structures may become targets for bombs or shells. The thought is not comforting, yet it is real. You press your head against the truck's side and shut your eyes, listening to the rattle of the wheels. In your mind, the headland continues to exist as it was before the war, just rock, sea, and wind. You hold that image close, a private version of the coast that no labor duty can fully take from you. You wake one morning in the far north, and the sky feels close to your face. It hangs low over rock, snow, and dark water, a heavy lid on a world that has never been gentle but at least used to be predictable. You pull on stiff boots and layers of wool, open the door, and meet air so sharp it seems to scrape your lungs. Somewhere out on the white distance, you hear faint reindeer bells, as if the land itself is stirring. Life here is built around distance and rhythm. Sami families move with their herds across tundra and sparse forest, following old routes from winter pasture to summer grazing. Fishing villages hug small coves, houses low and tough, boats pulled high against storms. A mainstream fact slips quietly into this landscape. During the war, northern Norway, especially Finnmark near the Barents Sea, becomes a key military region for German forces, fighting Soviet troops and guarding Arctic convoys. Your remote corner suddenly sits on the front row of a global struggle. You notice the change in the sky. Aircraft that once turned every head now appear so often that only the first engine of the day earns a glance. German planes patrol coastal waters, silver shapes against grey clouds. Later, Soviet bombers cross the same routes, their engines a deeper growl. You stand in a clearing, snow squeaking under your boots, and watch dark specks move steadily across the pale light. Each new sound from above nudges your old idea of safety a little farther away. On the ground, German positions dig into the coast. Batteries squat on cliffs, guns pointing toward the sea. New airstrips flatten patches of land that used to hear nothing louder than foxpaws and Sami skis. Warehouses and barracks rise near small harbors. You travel along narrow roads between rock and fjord, passing trucks, guards, and signs in a language that never quite fits in your mouth. Sami herders find fresh fences where there were none before. Wire laid straight across migration paths that had only ever answered to weather and lichen. Historians still argue whether the planners in distant offices understood how deeply those lines sliced through Sami life, or saw this region as an almost empty board for their pieces. Winter arrives like someone turning down a dimmer switch. Daylight shrinks into a brief grey smear, and night stretches until it feels like an extra wall in every room. You do what people here have always done. Add wood to the fire. Mend mittens again. Warm your hands around strong coffee simmering in blackened kettles. In some Sami tents, small chunks of cheese dropped into that coffee soften slowly, turning a bitter drink into a tiny act of comfort. When the retreat begins, it does not arrive politely. It comes with smoke. Orders from far above are blunt. As German forces withdraw, they are to leave nothing useful behind in Finnmark and northern Troms. Houses are burned, boats wrecked, livestock taken or killed, roads and bridges damaged. You see the first column of smoke on a far hillside, and know this is not a barn accident. The plume is too tall and too steady. Later, another column rises along the fjord, then another, until the horizon looks like a row of dirty fingers smudging the sky. Evacuation orders follow the fire. People are told to leave quickly, to bring what they can carry, to trust that someone somewhere has a plan for where they will sleep. Some are packed onto ships and smaller boats under guard, bound for reception camps farther south. Others are marched along roads in tired lines, leading children by the hand, balancing bundles on sledges and carts that squeak in protest. Sami families face an extra wound. If they leave everything, seasonal camps, storehouses, and grazing routes may vanish under ash and new maps. If they stay, they risk being hunted as deserters in the very valleys that taught them to walk. Some choose a third path. They slip away before the roundups tighten, vanishing into a landscape they know like a second skin. Turf huts, caves, and rock overhangs become hidden shelters. Reindeer herds turn into both lifeline and loud secret. They provide meat, milk, and movement, yet can betray you if spotted from the air. Fires are kept tiny, tucked into hollows, smoke coaxed to hug the ground. Stories spread about families who spend long weeks this way, traveling by ski and sled between safe places, living on dried meat and fish, measuring time in auroras and moon phases rather than calendars. Meanwhile, the official evacuations continue in all their noisy confusion. You might stand on a crowded pier, breath fogging the air, listening to orders barked across the din. Older people stare back at burning or blackened villages with expressions that seem to hold whole sagas in a single glance. A child cries because a favorite toy is left behind. A dog refuses to board until someone simply lifts it like an armful of stubborn fur. A bundle bursts open, scattering clothes and a cracked framed photograph onto wet planks. A stranger kneels to help, hands moving quickly, then disappears back into the crush without exchanging names. When the war finally passes on, you return to a coast that feels half erased. Blackened chimneys stick up from snow where houses once stood. Twisted stoves and bed frames sit in the open, rusting slowly. Boat keels lie belly up on the beach, ribs charred and cracked. Places you used to navigate by smell and sound are reduced to outlines on the ground and stories in older voices. Rebuilding begins with whatever can be found. Tents and turf shelters go up first, then barracks, then new houses, often in straighter lines decided by distant planners. Sami families come back to find some traditional sites destroyed or fenced. Others folded into new settlement schemes that pull their children toward different schools and work. The far north stays what it has always been in one essential way. It is a place where people survive by knowing the land deeply and refusing to give up just because the wind is loud. The war and the scorched earth retreat lay scars across that knowledge. Yet when you step out under a sky, finally free of searchlights, and listen for faint reindeer bells beyond the rebuilt road, you can feel in the rock itself that this landscape has been burned, uprooted, and is still quietly here. You are 15 and stuck in the middle of 3 wars at once. One is between huge armies and governments. One is between adults in your own town who disagree about everything. The last one is between you and your own hair, which refuses to do anything respectable, no matter how much water you throw at it. If anyone ever writes about stress, they should remember that adolescence during an occupation is already a full-time campaign. Your day starts the way most days do. Someone shouts you out of bed earlier than any human should be awake, especially in winter. The house is chilly. The floorboards sting your bare feet. You pull on patched socks and the same wool sweater you wore yesterday and tomorrow. Fashion options are limited when clothing coupons vanish faster than chocolate at a family party. School is still there, which is both a relief and a challenge. You trudge along icy streets with a satchel that smells faintly of pencil shavings and dried fish from yesterday's lunch. At the entrance, a faded notice reminds everyone that certain organizations are recommended for youth. The phrase "recommended" has a hint of threat in it, the way a parent might recommend that you clean your room before visitors arrive. Inside, the classroom feels familiar. Chalkboard, scraped desks, the low murmur of classmates comparing homework that most of them did in a hurry. What has changed is the invisible weight of expectation. There is pressure for young people to join national samling youth groups that mirror German models. A mainstream fact sits at the back of the room. The occupation authorities try to shape Norwegian youth through organizations like NS Ungdomsfylking and imports of Hitler Youth-style activities, hoping to grow a loyal new generation from the ground up. You sit through lessons where some teachers carefully avoid controversial topics and others sneak in material that feels quietly rebellious. A poem about freedom appears in a reading assignment, and your stomach does a little flip when the word chains shows up on the page. Across the room, a friend catches your eye and raises an eyebrow, a fraction. It feels like sharing a secret handshake that no one actually taught you. Outside class, the choices multiply. There are new youth events with uniforms, flags, and speeches about unity. You are invited to join. Some classmates sign up. They like the idea of organized sports, weekend camps, hot meals, maybe a sense of belonging that does not involve ration cards. Others keep their distance, claiming they are too busy helping at home or already committed to church youth groups or scouting. You know at least one boy who pretends he has an incurable allergy to marching. Every time he passes a parade, he begins to cough theatrically until the last drumbeat fades. You find yourself in the middle, pulled by curiosity, caution, and the simple desire not to stand out too much. Historians still argue whether most Norwegian teens joined Nazi-aligned youth activities because of genuine enthusiasm, social pressure, or simple boredom with nothing else to do. From where you sit, the answer feels more mixed. You see a girl who glows with pride in her new uniform, and you also see a boy who goes only because his father insisted, and his mind clearly stays somewhere else. Friendships bend under the strain. In the schoolyard, small groups form in corners. Some clusters revolve around sports or music. Others quietly orbit politics. You notice that certain friends no longer invite you to their homes as often, perhaps because a parent has joined the party and feels uncomfortable with visitors whose families are less enthusiastic. At the same time, other friendships deepen because you have silently agreed that you see the world in similar ways, even if you never say it aloud. Romance does not stop for wars. You still get tongue-tied when a particular person looks your way. You still worry about spots on your chin and whether your shoes look ridiculous. Dances become complicated events. Official ones might feature approved songs and posters with cheerful slogans on the walls. Unofficial ones move into barns, back rooms and cellars, where someone smuggles in records or a battered accordion that plays tunes the censors would probably dislike. A quirky detail spreads among teenagers. Some begin sewing tiny extra pockets into their coats and skirts, just big enough for a folded photograph or a scrap of band sheet music, because even love letters now need hiding places. You experiment with your own form of quiet resistance. Maybe it is refusing to raise your arm in a salute when a certain official visits school and pretending you did not hear the instruction. Maybe it is drawing a small V for victory inside your notebook cover where only your closest friends will see it. Maybe it is delivering messages for older siblings or cousins who have more direct roles in resistance groups. You learn that carrying a seemingly ordinary envelope from one house to another can feel more nerve-wracking than any exam. Not everyone your age wants to be involved in anything risky. There are those who focus purely on surviving the school year, passing tests, helping with younger siblings, and stealing a few hours of normal fun when they can. They apportion their courage carefully, saving it for the moment they might really need it. Sometimes you envy them, other times you worry that doing nothing will somehow still count as a choice later. Youth does not protect you from that question. It just makes it harder to answer. Leisure changes along with everything else. Comic books and magazines either disappear or become tightly controlled. You share dog-eared copies of foreign stories passed hand to hand until the pages threaten to fall apart. Someone hides an illegal newspaper inside an old comic, folding it so that a smiling cartoon hero on the cover conceals far less cheerful news. Reading it in a corner of the schoolyard, you feel as if you are getting away with both mischief and treason at once. Sports offer a strange patch of normality. Skiing, football, athletics continue, sometimes under new leadership, sometimes stubbornly independent. On a snow-covered hill, you race with friends, breath burning in your lungs, legs aching pleasantly. For a while, uniforms and posters feel far away. Then you notice a party official watching from the edge of the slope, making notes. You remember that, even here, who organizes events and what banners hang at the finish line can become questions of loyalty. At home, evening routines carry their own quiet education. Around the table, older relatives share stories. A parent comments on a party speech with dry humor. A grandparent mutters about past hardships and warns that movements built on fear tend to crumble eventually. You soak up these remarks like soup into bread. They shape your sense of right and wrong more effectively than any official lecture. You also begin to think past the war, at least on nights when the air is still and your mind has space. What kind of adult do you want to be? One who can say they did something, however small, to hold on to certain values, or one who shrugs and says it was all too complicated? These thoughts bump into more immediate worries, like whether you will ever own a proper pair of shoes again, or whether that person with the kind eyes will ever dance with you twice in a row. Big questions and small ones jostle together in your head because there is no rule that says you must pick only one kind at a time. By the time you crawl under your blanket, the day feels longer than its hours. You replay conversations, checking them for anything that might cause trouble. You remember a shared joke in the corridor about a pompous local official and wonder if anyone else heard. You picture a friend practicing a march in an official youth drill and another friend slipping away to deliver a message. You realize that growing up in this time is not just about algebra, grammar, and figuring out how to be less awkward. It is also about learning, very quickly, what you will stand for, what you will quietly cross off the list, and who you trust enough to tell the difference. You stand in the middle of a Saturday market where everything smells faintly of fish, tar, and boiled potatoes, and you realize that the beating heart of your occupied town lives right here between the stalls. The war has turned shopping into strategy, gossip into currency, and ordinary errands into quiet adventures. If anyone ever designs a board game called Survive the Ration Line, you quietly think it should pay royalties to this exact strip of cobblestones. The official part of the market looks tidy. Stalls display rows of vegetables, bread, dried fish, and the occasional treasure of fresh meat. People move slowly, clutching ration cards and thin purses. Prices are posted, supplies are limited, and everyone pretends that the rules are clear. A mainstream fact hides behind those printed signs. Throughout the occupation, the legal food system in Norway strains under pressure, with rationing unable to cover real needs, and many families forced to supplement with home gardens, fishing, and whatever they can find outside official channels. Just beyond the neat rows lies another layer of trade. Out of the corner of your eye, you catch exchanges that do not involve stamps. A hand moves quickly under a table. A bundle changes direction before it reaches a stall. Someone pauses for an extra long time near a cart, speaking softly. The black market does not hang a sign. It lives in glances, gestures, and careful phrases. Historians still argue whether this illegal trade mainly helped ordinary people survive, or whether it deepened inequality by giving those with money and connections a much easier war. You become good at reading code. Fresh eggs are impossible to find officially, yet someone carries a basket under a cloth that smells suspiciously promising. You drift closer and comment on the fine weather in a certain tone. If the reply matches the pattern you have learned, a transaction might be possible. Coffee, butter, sugar, tobacco, meat, all move like this when they can. Sometimes the goods are genuine. Sometimes the butter has been stretched with something that tastes like disappointment. You accept both, because even a hint of normal flavor can turn a thin slice of bread into a small holiday. Life refuses to stop for hunger. Weddings still happen, which feels defiant in itself. You are invited to one in a village hall that has seen more meetings than celebrations lately. The bride wears a dress altered from an older gown found in a trunk, with extra panels hiding shiny patches. Somewhere down the road, another bride walks in a gown sewn from curtains, turning what once kept out the cold into something that invites people in. A quirky detail people repeat with a smile is that some women paint stocking seams down the backs of bare legs when real silk has vanished, refusing to let shortages cancel elegance. The reception menu is a small miracle of creativity. Meat is stretched by oats and vegetables. Potatoes are dressed up with a little butter, someone saved for months, and a cake built on sugar beets appears under a thin dusting of real sugar. People sit on benches, shoulders pressed together, and for a few hours the hall fills with laughter, music, and the familiar sound of forks on plates. You cannot forget the uniforms and posters outside, but you can hold them at the door long enough for the couple to dance without watching the windows for patrols. The black market carries risks alongside its rewards. Prices can be outrageous. Authorities treat illegal trade as sabotage of their control. Raids on suspected dealers happen at dawn, boxes turned out, sacks opened, excuses tested. You hear that in one town a housewife caught with extra flour tried to explain that she simply loves to bake and does not trust empty shelves. The official response is not amused. Fines, confiscations, and even prison sentences remind everyone that feeding your family outside the ration books can be labeled a crime. Yet the lines between legal and illegal blur when hunger sits at your table every night. A fisherman sells part of his catch directly to neighbors for cash because the official price will not cover repairs to his boat. A farmer slaughters a pig quietly and shares the meat among trusted families, counting on their silence. You might find yourself stirring a pot of stew that contains meat whose exact origin you carefully do not specify. You taste it and tell yourself that survival sometimes wears shades of grey that no poster on the wall can classify. Markets become information hubs as much as food centers. While hands exchange coins and ration cards, mouths exchange updates. Someone brings news of an air raid far down the coast. Someone else has a cousin in the merchant navy and passes on word of convoys, sinkings, and ships that somehow limped into port anyway. You gather these pieces, fitting them together later at home into a patchwork understanding of a war that stretches far beyond the fish stall and the potato crate. You also learn that generosity can travel through the same channels as profit. There are traders who charge every coin they can get and stash it in secret places. There are others who quietly undercharge widows, slip extra potatoes into the sacks of families with many children, and look away when someone cannot quite pay the full amount. One day you see a vendor pretend to miscount and place one more onion than paid for into the basket of an old man with shaking hands. The gesture is tiny and quick, but it warms you more than any official speech. Walk home from the market with your modest haul, and you carry more than food. You bring back the echo of laughter over thin cake, the sharp memory of whispered prices for forbidden butter, the smell of smoked fish clinging to your coat, the feel of coins that could once have bought sugar, but now barely cover barley. In your pocket there is also a folded scrap of paper with a date and a name, passed to you while you pretended to examine carrots. That meeting might involve something stronger than coffee and more dangerous than sugar. By the time you set your basket on the kitchen table and begin to unpack, the market already feels like another small front in a war that stretches into every corner of life. You slice bread, spread it with a careful amount of whatever you manage to secure, and listen to the sounds drifting in from the street. Somewhere a child laughs as if all this is normal. Somewhere else a cart rattles away loaded with goods that may or may not exist on any official inventory. You take a bite and let the simple taste anchor you, reminding your tired mind that even in a world of shortages and secret trades, there can still be plain bread, warm hands, and the quiet knowledge that for tonight at least, there is enough to eat. Winter arrives early this time, or maybe it just feels that way because you are already tired, deep in your bones. The first snow lands on roofs that have not seen a proper coat of paint in years. It settles on fences repaired with whatever scrap wood people could find. It gathers in the ruts of streets worn down by trucks, carts, and boot soles from 3 different armies that all claim they are in control. You step outside into air that bites your cheeks and tastes of coal smoke, wood smoke, and something metallic underneath. The days are short, and the news feels even shorter. Official announcements drone on about continuing struggle and loyal citizens. People listen with flat faces, then lean closer around stoves and whisper very different stories. Someone heard that the Germans have lost city after city in the east. Someone else says the Allies are pushing up through Europe. A cousin sends word from the merchant fleet that convoys from the west are growing stronger. None of it changes the fact that tonight, your main concern is whether there is enough wood for the fire and enough potatoes for the pot. Electricity is unreliable now. Power cuts come without warning. You might be halfway through cooking when the light clicks off and the stove sighs into silence. The room becomes a cave lit by one candle. You adjust your plans automatically, moving pots aside, reaching for an extra blanket. If anyone wants a historical fact to go with their thin soup, it is this. By the final winters of the occupation, shortages of fuel and electricity hit Norwegian towns hard, leaving many households cold and dim for long stretches. It is not dramatic in the way battles are, but it gets into your joints and stays there. Bombers pass overhead more often. At first, you run to the window every time you hear engines, trying to guess from the sound whether they are German or Allied. The thrill fades when you realize that any plane with bombs cares more about rail lines and docks than about who lives under the roofs nearby. Air raid sirens wail in the dark. You grab your coat and whatever valuables you can carry and hurry to shelters that smell of damp stone, old tobacco, and too many people breathing the same stale air. Waiting in those shelters is its own kind of test. Children fidget, babies cry, older people sit very still, eyes closed, lips moving silently. You listen for explosions and try to place them on the mental map in your head. That was far away. That was closer. Maybe that one hit the harbor. A man who claims to have served in the previous war insists he can tell the size of a bomb just from the echo. You are not sure whether to believe him, but his confidence anchors a tiny corner of the room. After all clear signals, you climb out into streets that sometimes look almost normal and sometimes do not. Broken glass crunches underfoot. A window that once displayed shoes is now a jagged hole with a curtain flapping inside. Fire engines stand in puddles that smell of ash. People move quickly, cleaning up, helping neighbors, doing the next necessary thing. You notice that no one wastes time debating whether the damage counts as important. If the wall has a crack, someone finds a plank. If the door is gone, someone leans up a sheet. Life keeps pushing forward because stopping offers no benefits. Reprisals hang over everything as a constant threat. Acts of sabotage still happen, targeting rail lines, supply depots, power stations. When they succeed, there is a brief surge of quiet satisfaction in kitchens and workshops. Almost immediately, talk turns to fear about who will pay the price. You hear of arrests in another town after a German soldier is shot. Dozens of people detained for questioning, some never seen again. In your own district, word spreads that a planned action has been cancelled because the likely response would scorch more than it would help. Historians still argue whether resistance groups always chose wisely when weighing the cost of operations against possible reprisals, or whether some decisions were driven more by courage and desperation than by cold calculation. From your vantage point, it feels like trying to do math during an earthquake. Food grows even scarcer. You stretch soup with more water and more imagination. Dried fish, turnips, thin porridge, all make regular appearances. You joke that if someone published a cookbook called 1000 Ways to Cook a Potato Without Getting Bored, it would become a bestseller overnight. Then you admit you would still get bored around recipe number 30. A quirky habit takes hold in some homes. People keep a small stash of sugar or coffee hidden away and name it the liberation jar, promising not to touch it until the war is over. Whether it holds 3 spoonfuls of sugar or 2 spoonfuls of ground coffee, the jar becomes a symbol more than a food item. Just knowing it is there helps. Clothes are patched until they barely resemble their original shape. You wear sweaters with elbows that tell a story of 4 different colors of yarn. Shoes are resoled again and again. You stuff newspaper into holes and hope the snow stays politely outside. Fashion becomes less about style and more about layers. Scarves, mittens, extra socks, anything that keeps the cold from biting too deep. You look at photographs from before the war and notice how smooth and unworried everyone's coats appear. It feels like staring at a different climate. Despite the cold and fear, something shifts in the atmosphere that you cannot quite name at first. German soldiers look more tired. Their uniforms seem less crisp. You overhear fragments of their conversations in bakeries and in line at the post office. References to fronts collapsing, to letters from home that sound worried, to commanders who make unrealistic demands. The once steady march in the streets picks up a ragged edge, as if even discipline cannot fully hide fatigue. Rumors move faster than trains now. Someone hears that Hitler is dead, then hears he is not, then hears he might be any day. Someone claims that Allied troops will land on your shores within the month. A radio listener insists that a big announcement from London is coming soon. Another person points out that people have been saying soon for years. You sit by the stove at night and let your imagination jump ahead to parades, flags and speeches. Then you pull it back firmly, reminding yourself that until someone with a clear voice and authority says a certain set of words, you still need to fetch water in the morning and stand in line for bread. The occupiers tighten grip, even as their position weakens. New orders appear about curfews, identification papers, allowed gatherings. Patrols seem more nervous. You sense a sharpness in some officials, as if they know that history may not declare them heroes, and they are determined at least not to lose control on their own watch. There are more searches, more ID checks, more questioning at random. Giving your name and address to a stranger in uniform never becomes a comfortable habit, no matter how many times you practice it. At the same time, some people act with a new boldness. Illegal newspapers spread more widely. The underground organization in your area recruits more openly within trusted circles. Symbols of loyalty to the exiled king appear in windows, sometimes half hidden behind curtains, sometimes placed where they cannot be missed. You sew a small ribbon to the inside of your coat collar and touch it with your fingertips when you need to steady yourself. It is not magic, yet it feels like a personal pact with a future you still cannot see clearly. From the outside, your days remain simple. You chop wood, haul water, queue for food, work when told, keep your papers close and your comments closer. Inside your mind, the war has turned into a series of balances that you adjust constantly. Hope balanced against caution, anger against patience, the urge to shout against the need to wait. The winter wind rattles your window, and you pull your blanket higher, counting breaths rather than days until something changes. Somewhere in the distance, guns roar, trains grind, and important men argue over maps. In your small room, with wax pooling at the base of a candle and frost tracing pale flowers on the glass, you hold on to the stubborn belief that sooner or later the engines in the sky will go silent, and the firewood in your arms will be used to warm rooms where no one needs to whisper. The day does not begin with trumpets. It begins with a rumor. Someone bangs on your door far too early, shouting half sentences through the wood. You stumble into your clothes, heart racing, and pull it open. A neighbor stands there, hair wild, eyes bright in a way you have not seen for years. The words tumble out. The Germans are leaving. The war is ending. There are flags in the streets. You blink, try to fit those words into the same world as ration cards and sirens, and then your body starts moving before your thoughts catch up. You hurry outside into a morning that feels strangely light, even if the sky is its usual grey. Across the street, a child waves a small flag on a stick that might once have been part of a broom. Larger flags appear in windows, shaken out from hiding places behind wardrobes and under floorboards. Red, white, and blue, that has not seen daylight in years, suddenly flutters from balconies, chimneys, improvised poles tied to railings. A mainstream fact breathes inside this blur of color. In May 1945, German forces in Norway capitulate, and the country celebrates liberation, with the 8th of May marked as a day of victory and remembrance. People flood onto the streets. Some laugh, some cry openly, some simply walk as if they cannot bear to stay inside a minute longer. Church bells ring without stopping. Whistles and car horns answer. You see a group of young people marching with homemade banners, faces flushed with joy. Someone starts singing a song that has been banned for years, and voices join in from doorways, from open windows, from the middle of the road. The words catch in your throat for a second before they find their way out, rusty from disuse yet still there. German soldiers are visible too, but they look different. Weapons are stacked. Helmets are off. Many stare at the ground or into the distance as they wait for orders to move out. Travel to camps, step into their own uncertain futures. The threat they carried for so long feels strange now, like a storm cloud that has lost its lightning. You watch one soldier stand awkwardly beside his pack while Norwegian children run past him waving flags. For a moment he seems like a man who misplaced his story and does not know how to act in this new version. As the first days of celebration stretch on, deeper currents begin to rise. People who kept quiet for years start to talk. Names of resistance fighters are spoken in the open with pride. Stories of sabotage, escape routes, and hidden radios are shared in daylight instead of behind curtains. The underground organizations step up from cellars and back rooms into town squares. Flags and armbands change sides. Photos are taken, speeches are made. Historians still argue whether the picture that forms in these early weeks gives a balanced view of how many resisted, how many adapted, and how many simply tried not to drown, or whether the new narrative leans too heavily toward heroism and forgets the quiet middle. With victory comes reckoning. Legal processes begin for those who collaborated actively with the occupiers. Courtrooms fill with files, witnesses, and sharp questions. People who wore certain pins, signed certain papers, or carried certain orders are called to explain themselves. Some receive prison sentences, some lose civil rights, a few face the ultimate penalty. Vidkun Quisling, whose name became a word for traitor even outside the country, stands trial in Oslo and is executed later that year. You read about it in the paper and feel a mix of grim satisfaction and a strange tiredness. Justice on headlines feels necessary. It also does not restore the years that vanished. On the streets, justice is not always orderly. Women accused of close relationships with German soldiers are dragged into squares. Crowds shout. Hair is cut roughly, sometimes shaved off entirely. Faces are painted or smeared with tar. You stand at the edge of one of these scenes and feel your stomach twist. Anger, humiliation, hunger for some kind of visible balancing of accounts, all swirl together. A quirky detail that lodges in your mind is that someone in the crowd complains loudly when scissors are used instead of clippers, as if the method matters more than the meaning. You step back, uncertain, unable to cheer, unable to look away completely. At home, boxes that have stayed shut for years are finally opened. Liberation jars of sugar and coffee come out of cupboards, lids unscrewed with ceremonial care. You spoon real sugar into your cup and watch it dissolve, amazed that something so simple can feel like such a luxury. The first taste of proper coffee hits you with an almost dizzying clarity. For a moment you feel both overwhelmingly happy and strangely sad, thinking of all the mornings that passed without this, all the friends who would have loved one more cup. Daily life does not snap back like an elastic band. Buildings are damaged. Roads and bridges need repair. People search for missing relatives, write letters that may never find answers, visit graves that still feel too fresh. Food shortages do not vanish on command. Reconstruction is a long, patient process of lifting, building, planting, and planning. You plant potatoes, not just because you must, but because filling the soil with something that will grow feels like the clearest act of faith you know. You also have to live with memories that do not match well with simple labels. The neighbor who quietly sheltered a family suddenly becomes a local hero. The other neighbor who joined the party has moved away, leaving behind a house that now sits with curtains open, but no one in the windows. The German soldier who once gave sweets to children has probably been sent to a camp along with others, his fate unreported. People gossip, forgive, hold grudges, reconsider. Some friendships mend, others cannot. At night, sleep is not as easy as you once imagined it would be once the war ended. It arrives in fits and starts. Sometimes you wake to the sound of a car outside, and your heart races before you remember that the midnight knock you fear no longer belongs to this time. Sometimes dreams drag you back into bomb shelters, queues and stairwells full of boots. You walk again through burning villages in your mind, or stand once more in a courtroom as a witness, your voice catching as you speak truths that never fit well into neat sentences. In quieter moments, you try to picture the future. Will you stay in this town or move to a city? Will you rebuild the family business or learn a new trade? Will you talk to your children openly about these years or shield them as much as possible? Historians still argue whether post-war Norway did enough, soon enough, to talk honestly about everything that happened, particularly about the treatment of minorities and the complex mix of resistance and collaboration. For you, even the effort to frame a single story from your own memories feels like carrying water in your hands. Some always spills. Yet there are simple things that bring you back into the present in a kinder way. A spring afternoon when the sun finally feels warm on your face again, the first time you walk through town and realize that you have not glanced nervously at a single uniform. The moment you watch children play in the street with games that have nothing to do with checkpoints or soldiers. The day you look up at a sky full of clouds, not aircraft, and realize that you are simply wondering if it will rain instead of who might be flying overhead. You sit by a window as evening comes, listening to the ordinary sounds of peacetime slowly reassemble themselves. Distant laughter, a dog barking, a radio playing music that is chosen for pleasure rather than propaganda. The war still lives in your muscles and your dreams, but outside the air smells a little less of fear and a little more of wood smoke and damp earth. You breathe in and out, and for the first time in years, you feel that each breath belongs entirely to you. The street below grows quiet. Lights appear in windows, steady and calm. Somewhere, someone is celebrating a birthday with a real cake for the first time in a long time. Somewhere else, an old man sits alone and stares at empty chairs. The country is free, yet everyone carries their own private front line inside. You sit there, watching the light fade, and slowly understand that liberation is not a single day with flags and speeches. It is a long, winding road of mending, talking, remembering, and, sometimes, choosing to rest. Now, as you lie back and let your head sink into your pillow, the stories of occupied days and restless nights begin to drift toward the edges of your mind. The heavy boots on the stairs, the whispering kitchens, the cold work on the coast, all of it becomes softer, like footprints slowly filling with fresh snow. You are still here. You made it through storms that once felt endless. Tomorrow will not be perfect, but it will be yours in a way that no soldier, no poster, no decree can ever take away again. The room around you is quiet. The walls no longer seem to listen. Outside, the night air moves gently, carrying only the usual small sounds of a town settling into sleep. You feel the rhythm of your own breathing slow, each breath a little deeper, a little easier. The pictures in your mind grow less sharp and more like distant lights across a fjord, pleasant to look at from far away but no longer demanding your steps. If you wish, you can imagine yourself standing once more on a high hill above a Norwegian village, the fjord below dark and calm, the houses shining with warm yellow windows. There are no warships in the harbor now, no searchlights, no sudden engines overhead, only the soft lap of water against the shore and a breeze that smells of pine and salt and clean snow. The flag on the churchyard pole hangs still in the night air, not needing to prove anything, simply resting along with you. Let your shoulders sink a little heavier into the bed. Let your hands unclench, fingers loosening from all the invisible things they have been holding. Your thoughts can wander if they want to, but they no longer need to stand guard. The fires are banked. The doors are locked gently, not in fear but out of habit. Somewhere, a radio plays a quiet tune, and the notes drift in like a friendly tide, carrying you away from drills and alarms into something softer. You are allowed now to sleep without listening for footsteps. You are allowed to dream about small, ordinary days that begin with real coffee, warm bread, and the simple decision of which sweater to wear because there is no uniform waiting on a chair. As your eyes grow heavier and the room fades, you can let the long story of occupation and liberation fold itself up like a map, tucked safely away on a shelf. It will still be there if you ever wish to look again. For tonight, you can simply close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the quiet of a free Norway wrap around you like a thick, warm blanket.